Today is Monday, February 24th, 2025. This is the Budget and Finance Advisory Committee. Call to order. Start with you. Just say your name.
I am Debbie Colby, and I'm the student representative.
Thank you. Kenny Duba, Superintendent.
Jennifer Lima, school committee member.
Sherry Kennedy, school committee member.
Bob Jones, community member.
Leslie and Powell, director of finance.
The next item on the agenda is public comment. There is no one here for public comment, so we'll move on to the next item, which is the review of the fiscal year 26 school budget. So everyone should have a copy, either paper copy or you had it electronically from what was sent for school committee. So we will, I guess what we'll do first, we'll go through any changes that we had from previous, just kind of give an overview from page 1, and then go through anything that we changes to.
So most of the changes that came out that are represented in this version are based off of conversations that we had at the last budget meeting, which was on the 11th. And there were some suggestions, some recommendations, some discussion about ways that we could potentially better utilize some of our enterprise accounts and some of the money that is currently being housed, or surpluses that are being housed in those enterprise accounts. And then overall, we're just gonna look at the positions that we had talked about, possibly including, and then just going through. So the majority of changes that you'll see here are related to those items. So what I will do is I think the easiest thing to do is go through like on the tabs that have changes, if that's okay. So on the the Sal Ben tab that talks about salary and benefits. So I did a few things here that I just want to point out, nothing major, but I did move, we had, I think I mentioned in the very first meeting, we had the DEI coordinator. I had put them in a different bucket. So I did correct that and put them in the appropriate bucket so that it's more representative of where the positions are and what our FTE count is from year over year in each of those areas. So you'll notice it used to say 30, and administrative now is 29, and then the one below says 12.71, so that's the change there. One of the other things is that I personally, the more I looked at it, and I'm sure you noticed, I went through the dental numbers again because I just wanted to double check it. You know, it's one of those things where you look at it and you see these numbers all the time and you really want to be confident. So I re-pulled the numbers and I used a more recent sheet from the first time I pulled it. So the dental numbers will look different. I am much more comfortable and much more confident with the dental numbers that are represented here. Additionally, I did go through and tried to break out a little bit better the additional positions that we were putting in and how those benefits are rolled out in this. Initially, I had just kind of lumped all the benefits into one line item. That way, it was easier for me to be able to pull in and pull out and make changes as we discussed them with the school committee. And so at the bottom, you'll notice the difference in the total salary, total benefits are representative of all of those changes that I made. Does anybody have any questions on that? In central admin, one of the, and this is something that I'm thinking will be a discussion item tonight at the school committee meeting. One of the items that I changed, you'll notice here, is the fiscal software and programming. You'll see a reduction of $85,000. And then this will also be something that's going to be brought up in a capital recommendation. And the reason for this is I've been researching this for a while now, but I'm concerned with how expensive our fiscal software is. It's upwards of $180,000 a year, and I just think it's an expense that's unnecessary. And so I've been working with the current company we use with Tyler Technologies, and there is a school-specific ERP that we could migrate to that is specifically for school districts. It doesn't have all of the stuff. The current software that we use was for town and school together, so there's a lot of stuff in it that we don't even use anymore. And the cost for that is somewhere between $55,000 and $75,000 a year. big difference.
Big difference.
Yeah.
It's a big difference, and I do think it's still gonna provide all the support we need. I think it might even give us some better reporting, and help us out in some areas. So my recommendation here, is gonna be to the school committee is the implementation costs are unknown, but what I have been able to get from Tyler is that they can keep it within what would be budgeted for the full expense of the software we have now.
Are we tied into any type of contract or anything with the existing software?
No,
Okay.
no, and because we're moving, it's Tyler to Tyler.
Okay,
And so it actually makes the cost less for us to transition because they know what they're transitioning from and what they're transitioning to. And what they've told us is once we make the decision to transition, if the school committee approves that, we will start getting charged the new cost. And so my suggestion is to put whatever the difference is in capital, and as we need it for implementation costs, pull from there.
okay.
And whatever we don't gets put right back into fund balance. So I went ahead and I took that cost out of the operating budget and only left what the cost would be potentially moving forward. So that we're not completely removing it and not giving a true representation of what the cost would be, but, eliminating $85,000 from the budget, potentially. So that was the biggest change on this.
So that's line 50?
Yes.
Yes, line 50.
So you're saying 75 is the 26
They
going forward
approximated for
cost.
what we use and for the modules that we have, that we'd be somewhere in the range of $55,000 to $75,000 a year for the program. And right now, the anticipated cost is $180,000, and that's because we have our fiscal software, plus we have to have an additional piece of software to help run our accruals. We would be eliminating that piece as well. So we'd be saving the cost of the fiscal software plus that additional software. So I obviously think it's a great idea, but we'll obviously defer to the school committee as to what they think. And then, one of the other things, and I just wanted to ask, specifically Jen, you, but, one of the things we had talked about was that additional funds for the, DEI advertising.
Yes.
And the equity mission
Yeah.
advertising. And, I did not put it in here because I wasn't sure, did you want that to be a school committee related expense, or is that general
No, that's the
operating,
general
district-wide?
operating, yeah.
Okay, so that's something that we need to talk, I just didn't wanna put it in here and then have it be misrepresented.
And you're talking about the fiscal 26, not the 3 we talked about at the last.
Correct, I'm
meeting.
talking about
Okay.
fiscal 26,
Yep.
where it would be, so that $3,000 still needs to be represented in this budget, but, it's basically immaterial in terms of the percentage that we'd be
Yep.
presenting, but just wanted to make sure I had that in the right place. The next tab.
While we're on this tab,
Sure.
is that okay, Kenny, to talk about?
Mhm.
I make a motion to reduce the school committee advertising by 5,000 and the school committee training by 5,000. You can figure out ways of advertising there's lots of ways to do training without spending direct money. And my feeling is that, if you wanna start it at the beginning, that's something you can easily cut, work around, and just save $10,000.
So we had discussed this because you brought it up at the last meeting, and I thought it was a very valid question. The advertising is for newspaper advertising, and those are not cheap. What are they, Ken, like?
I think it's almost $1,000.
Right.
Advertising for,
For subcommittee advisory meetings.
Anything that the school committee has asked to put in the newspaper, it's close to
so
$1,000
how did you get
to
away with
advertise.
it before we did that way, when it was zero?
I don't know.
So.
I don't think stuff was I would say maybe it wasn't advertised in the paper, or maybe it was probably just
Is
sent
it a
out on the
requirement
website.
to advertise in the paper?
Well, we want to reach not just the school community, we want to reach community members.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
For each advertisement in the newspaper, is that just one cycle?
Yes.
Yes.
That's one
Yeah.
cycle, so you'd be
Mhm.
having it once, so that's
Yeah.
why you're thinking of 5 different
Yeah.
cycles of doing that.
So like I said, we discussed this, and the same thing with the training. We're all required to undergo 6 hours professional development. As you know, this covers that.
Right, which has been solved by previous committees without having to spend $5,000. Again, I'm just saying, look at people's electric bills, gas bills.
Mhm.
Look at the revals that everyone's hitting their home right now. That's gonna hit you a year or 2 years from now. Like,
I'll
you
bring it
gotta
up
start
again tonight
You
with
gotta
the
start
committee.
somewhere.
But we addressed it already at the committee level, and I don't think it's appropriate to revisit it at this level,
No,
so.
we didn't discuss,
We discussed it at the school committee.
Well, I'll
okay.
say as a new member, I thought it was very beneficial to go to that versus doing something online. I felt like you actually interacted and really, I felt like I learned a lot during that meeting,
So, I mean, we
during
can-
that whole day.
So just to clarify, some of the trainings that you go to are covered through the Rhode Island School Committee. Just,
Right, which
just
is
so
how
you
we
know,
went.
like the
That's
trainings
what
you went
this
to.
is.
Yes.
Yeah,
And that's under your professional
Yeah.
fees and dues.
yeah.
Right, this is above and beyond that, the 5,000.
Which 5,000?
No, isn't that the 5,000 you're talking about? Is
No.
this-
For training.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's the
that's the
training.
training. We have to
Right.
pay for that school committee 101.
Right, but once you do it, you don't have to do it every year.
But you have to get 6 hours every year.
Right, I guess my point is going, okay, like, I don't think you're gonna get 3.8%. That's just my personal feeling, I have no idea, but you gotta start somewhere identifying
And-
stuff.
And I hear you, and that's why I specifically raised this very issue with the entire school committee during the budget discussion. And there was no appetite to change
Okay.
this.
I will say, just since we're talking about the school committee and my conversations with the, director of IT or supervisor of IT, that there might be some room within the technical services.
Okay.
With that software that we were talking about. He did not go into specifics, and again, I don't wanna misspeak on his behalf, but we were talking about the possibility that we might be able to have a small reduction there. So perhaps we may be able to find some savings in that line item.
Yeah, and I'm
Um,
happy to readdress it tonight with the entire committee, but the entire committee had the conversation. I don't think it's appropriate to overturn that at the advisory level.
And I'll write it down as a talking point for us to bring up again. Okay. Anything else on this page while we're here? So the next tab where I made changes would be the IT line, which if you notice from the very first iteration of our budget to now, very stark contrast in what we're showing actually on this budget. So in previous conversations, we had talked about removing some of the items and putting them toward recommendations to use our fund balance. And I know we've still had some back and forth about whether or not the laptop should remain in here, or if we want to use fund balance. I don't think we've kind of finalized that, but knowing that adding $280,000 back into this budget is gonna, really spike what we're asking the town for. One of the things that I did propose, and I know there'll be some discussion on this, was I had been tasked with thinking about how to better utilize the computer repair balance for the enterprise fund. So one of the suggestions that I had made was, in my last proposal, I had kept $30,000 for admin laptops in the operating budget, and I had put $30,000 toward fund balance. So my recommendation would be to take the $30,000 out of the operating budget and use the computer repair fund. That's not a reoccurring cost, it's not something that happens all the time, so removing that from the operating budget is not gonna be a major issue moving forward. And then additionally, I had made some additional recommendations for other things that instead of using fund balance, we could use, so like the Unicorn, the DA server, things like that. So this budget, I reduced again by $30,000. And so, I know that was one of the conversations, Jen, that you and I were having during the school committee meeting about that fund. I don't know if you have any suggestions or thoughts on that before I bring it to the actual committee tonight.
No, I saw that, when you sent it over, and I think that's good, because that money's just sitting there and needs to be drawn down, and that's a good way to do it, so.
Well, could you clarify, cause in that thing it said from FY '25. So you're drawing 30K from the current fund balance, from the current enterprise fund, supplanting 30K from the current budget. And then you have 10,000 in '26.
So I have to just remember exactly how I had done it. I said I did 20 and 10, is that how I had done
You're
it?
30 and 10.
30 and 10.
You're 30 from, but it said FY '25,
So-
supplanting 30 in operating funds.
The way that I was thinking that it could work is because this exists now. So to be perfectly honest, the need for administrative laptops is
Right.
it's emergent, it's now. We were hoping to put them in fiscal '26 so that we would have them. If we are allowed to use the computer repair, we could purchase them now in '25. We don't have to wait till fiscal year '26. So they don't need to be in the fiscal year '26 budget, we could purchase them now. What was from the '26 budget, the $10,000 was, for, I believe it was one of the servers, I think. And I apologize, I have to go back and look exactly.
We
At
said
my
have
notes and how I had
laptops,
done it.
you did have 8K for something else and
Yep, there was
Davisville server. I guess my question is though, if you're supplanting 30K, which is budgeted or isn't budgeted in the FY '25?
It's not, it is
Okay.
not in '25
So,
at all.
so you're not saving 30K in the '25?
In '25, no, but we could purchase them in
Right,
'25.
which makes sense, I totally get it, but then it said 30K from the operating budget. So you're really
Of
putting 30K
26
in
proposed
and
op-
adding 30K, or are you gonna just buy it from the enterprise fund?
We would buy half of them from the enterprise fund and then half of them from the fund balance. Cause they're actually, it's actually $60,000.
Right, so I guess my point is,
So I might have reduced what is in the fund balance down to 20 from 30 and brought 10 out of that as well.
right, so I guess my question is, so you're right, it's kind of a non-structural,
Mhm.
everything, but you're buying 30 all at once. You have 29 admins by your FTE count. So you're kind of doing a whole clean sweep, which I get, except now you should really be saving some of the IT fund 1/3 or 1/4 every year, unless you're gonna start recycling every 5, or 10 every year.
Correct, which is what I think we've discussed at the school committee level, is that we ultimately need to have a plan, and we need to start developing that now, of how we're going to be able to do that and stagger it, so that we don't keep running into these issues where we have these large immediate purchases. And it's unfortunate that this particular item had kind of been on the chopping block every year internally as a not important thing until it became.
Right, I guess my question is, in the spreadsheet I saw, it said 10,000 for admin laptops in '26. You really should just be escrowing that, if you're gonna buy all 30, unless there's a need for 40 laptops. I'm trying to understand,
Well,
like, what's the need for admin
What
laptops
we
in
were,
general?
so we're gonna, what we can, let me back up so I don't get confusing. For $30,000 is not purchasing all of the laptops, that's half of the laptops.
Okay,
So that's part, so it's a $60,000 purchase. We have enough in computer repairs that we could use $30,000 in fiscal '25.
okay, so you're buying like half.
We're buying half of the
Okay,
laptops.
so you're cycling it over 2 years.
Yes, and so the people who absolutely need them are gonna get them first, the people who have the
Got it.
oldest laptops will get them first. That way, we can get them there now, and then those that have more time in their current devices, we can move to fiscal '26.
Right,
So,
so that makes perfect sense.
okay, I'm sorry,
But I
I
guess
had
what
to
my
back up
point
and be
is
like,
being is, the general point should be with your computer IT surplus is to escrow it, unless you're gonna then move to like 1/3 every year on a continual basis, and that's generally what the IT computer repair fund is. This is just my point.
Mhm.
Like, you're basically fixing the whole problem over 2 years, but it goes away then for a few years, in theory.
in theory, yes, and one of the things that when we put this plan together in my conversation with the supervisor of IT is that we're not completely depleting this account, and the hope is that over those years, that account will build up again, because there is excess money because of the insurance and how that account works. Not large amounts like we have in there now, but it will build up, so we're not completely depleting the account, we are leaving funds in there, one, in case we need them for for Chromebook needs, which is the point of the account. Also, so that, should this come up again in the next few years, we've now built a cushion where as laptops need to be replaced, we can replace them, and we're not just waiting and having to replace 30 laptops at
At once.
$2,000 piece. So that is the
Right.
ultimate goal.
Okay,
And provided the school committee is okay with that being the plan for the funds, that is our intent, is to then be able to use that account kind of moving forward for that need.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions, IT related? Alright. Facilities, I don't believe there are any major changes. Actually, I don't think there were any changes made to facilities in this go-round. So the next one would be transportation. So in line 35, you'll see, it doesn't look like a reduction because there's actually more year over year, there's still more money in that line, but originally in prior versions, there was $46,000 allocated in this line for the lease cost for that year for our 2 new buses that we bought. We actually purchased them now, but the lease was not going into effect until, our first payment was not gonna be due until fiscal '26, which is why it's showing in the budget. But my recommendation to the school committee is if we have surplus, we should certainly consider using our surplus right now to just purchase the buses outright so that we're saving a considerable amount of money on interest over the course of what would have been a 3-year lease. So I've removed that lease payment out of here because the intent would be, it's not gonna be something that's structural year over year. It was in addition to this budget and would be for the next 3 years. But I really just think it makes good fiscal sense to just pay them outright. And then in the last meeting, we talked about some of the adjustments that I had made with the bus contractor lines, so I'll just reiterate those. The dollar amounts, the bottom lines have all remained the same. I just reallocated it, in my opinion, more appropriately to the proper new color lines. Alright. Athletics. So athletics, you'll see some big changes here, and I put a proposal together again based on thinking about spending down some of our enterprise funds. And my reason for choosing the 3 items that I picked, which were rental of equipment, which I just realized there's a type spelling error in there, was rental of equipment athletics rental fees rink and gym, and rental fees pool. I chose those based on a comment that Chairperson Earl made in the last meeting, where she said, ideally, the thought is that we should have roughly the same amount of gate receipts year over year, ultimately, that are self-sustaining. When we look at what we have seen, almost, I don't wanna say guarantee, because nothing is a guarantee, but when we look at what we have had continually, say for the last 3 years, it is somewhere in the range of $35,000 to $40,000 that comes in as revenue for gate receipts. So with that in mind, it is very realistic to say that we could take $30,000 of what we are typically paying out of our operating budget and use gate receipts to pay for that, because it should be able to sustain year over year. And while doing that, still leave money in gate receipts should we need it for any, larger purchases or any emergent needs that come up. And then that would reduce the operating budget by $32,000. So just a suggestion, in terms, I'm open to, conversation about that, because I know there's always question when you're pulling things out, like we know we're gonna have a rink rental, we know we're gonna have gym rentals for different things. It's not, it's not a one-time thing, but in the understanding, like Chairperson Earl said, that we have that money year over year over year, it should be self-sustaining. But again, happy to discuss.
I think it's a terrible idea. It first of all, it masks the true cost of athletics. The true cost of athletics is $32,000 more than, and that's that's a decision that the school committee wants to fund athletics in the operating budget. Gate receipts may or may not be, right? I mean, it's no cost because the booster club, unless it's changed, right? The booster club mans it. Is that still true? The booster club provides the manning to take the tickets.
The volunteers?
The
No,
volunteers.
I think it's just the volunteer, the
Right.
parent volunteers.
But it goes to the booster club. So the booster club puts out a sign-up genius to get parents, already, family members to be at the
Right.
gates of the games, to collect.
And
And
that
then
could
it goes from
change.
them, and then it goes to us.
that could change, and then you'd have to pay someone to do it.
Mhm.
I guess the general point is, it's an enterprise fund.
But there is something where from that, there is something that goes to the booster club. It's not like a payment, but
Right,
they
you
do
get
a certain
discounted,
percentage.
they basically get commission for buying, but
They
that,
get a little.
I guess my point is
Then it
not
goes
the
back to
way the booster
students.
club, my point is simply, this is a structural expense. It should be in the operating budget. If you wanna use the gate receipts for more things like every other capital items and supplant something else that's capital in your operating budget, that would make sense. But your rink costs are gonna go up. Your gate receipts, I doubt, are gonna go up unless you raise the fees, which has not been the
That hasn't
appetite to
happened in
do.
a bazillion years.
Right, the appetite's been more to like make things more available. Your rink fees and other things, generally you're gonna go up. So it's not wise to put a structural expense that has inflationary tendencies against an enterprise fund where your general thing is to keep it steady or lower. So just don't supplant it. You can find, right, you can use the gate receipt surplus to supplant something else.
So I had suggested uniforms, because those are recurring, but it would be one way to reduce the operating budget this
Yes.
year.
Mhm.
That would make sense.
And it's not every other getting.
And it's something
Well-
specific that's going back to the student athletes.
And-
Correct.
And one of the reasons why I didn't do that,
Yeah.
just so that you understand my rationale, was in my conversations with Mr. Tober and the superintendent, that there have been discussions of making sure that the school, and some of this revolves around the student activity talks, like making sure that what is required of the students to be able to play the sport is provided by the school district. And within these supplies and uniforms line, those are things like football helmets and, lacrosse sticks or whatever it might be. So these are things, safety supplies and uniform, it's not just uniforms, it's things that are required to play the sport. So I was hesitant to take those out, because of those conversations.
Yeah, and I don't think we should take it out, but like, we've gotta get money out of this budget this year, right?
Yeah.
And I think we need to keep track of those things that we have kind of like creatively slid out for this year. Because next year, in
Mhm.
theory, it needs to be back into the budget, but
Mm.
when we're looking at chunks of money, there is a huge chunk of money sitting in that athletic.
It is
gate
though, I
receipt.
think we just need to be cautious that if we are going to make a decision to fund something that's a permanent cost through the gate receipts or another fund, and then we need to put it back in next year, that's gonna increase our right, it's increasing the budget, so it's gonna make, it's challenging once you take something out to put back
Right.
in.
It'll be a
So I think we wanna
disproportionate
be
increase
careful
year
of how
over year
we're
because
saying
now.
we're going to supplant, it's like what happened with ESSER,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
At the time, this district made decisions to use ESSER funding for positions that were needed. Now we're paying for it, essentially, right? We're trying to get it in because they're needed. We wanna be careful paying for those items that we're gonna.
I agree with you, but
need.
there's $90,000,
Yeah.
how much is there?
No, there was 60
60,
something.
I think 60.
So-
I think one-time use, like you said,
60,
uniforms.
Something, I mean, it's, when we're trying to pick $5,000 here and $5,000 there, that's a chunk of money that we can take.
So are you suggesting putting the rental fees out and using it for?
I understand
Okay.
Bob's logic with not wanting to
Yeah.
use that,
Mhm.
and I think in a case, in my mind anyways, I can rationalize that a uniform is a discrete purchase, not something that is part of the operating budget, like we have to rent the rink in order
Right.
to have the hockey team practice,
Okay.
right? Unless there's some other athletic related expense that you think that those can be used on.
Could you
Mhm.
separate, instead of saying uniform and supplies, could you make uniforms its own line and then supplies? So then, I get what you're saying, the supplies wouldn't be the helmets that are needed or,
I mean,
do you know what I'm saying? So then you could say
Yes,
it's just for uniforms being more specific than throwing it all together.
absolutely, and it is kind of now, so we've got uniforms and supplies, and then you've got equipment. So the equipment line is more, like I was saying, the helmets,
Yeah.
The safety stuff.
and then the uniforms and supplies is where it gets a little,
Because I'm wondering if the supplies
where
are
it
things
gets a
like
little
sticks,
kind of
balls, and maybe if you broke those
I-
out, then it'd be easier to use
I can certainly, it is,
for the uniforms,
It's
not
one Ucoa line,
the
that's the
balls.
problem.
right, it's all one Ucoa line, but,
Yeah.
but you could, I could break it out into girls soccer uniforms if you wanted. I don't think anyone wants to see
No,
that,
but
but I could.
saying because Mr. Tobers, I get what he was saying. Why not? You didn't want to take it out of there, but maybe he'd be fine if we made it a uniform line and a supply line.
Right, but what, I guess.
For me to add the 32 back into rink and take it out of supplies, like that's not a difficult thing for me to do. Ultimately, it's, are we comfortable supplanting something in the budget and using those gate receipts, knowing that it's gonna at some point potentially have to go back in, or do we want to make the decision to say, this is how we're funding it every year with the gate receipts?
I don't think we wanna fund it every year, but I think for this year, I think, you know, we're absorbing $1.9 million worth of ESSER this year, right? So if we have to take $30,000 out of the enterprise fund and stick the uniforms in it.
And so if that's, you know, collectively
Right,
what we
well-
think, I can make that change before, obviously what we're presenting tonight, the documents
right.
will be different, but I can make that change.
Well, wouldn't
or-
it just make sense to say, to recommend you put 31,000 back into UCOA lines, you know, sorry, I can't read it.
We can
but
also do that,
the-
we
but
can
the
do a
rental
transfer from
line
gate receipts to
and-
the operating budget.
And task the superintendent to find offsetting 31,000 in the operating budget, maybe athletics. Or at least this year for athletics to get a budget passed.
Well, if it's
Just
coming
let
from
the
gate receipts, it has to be,
superintendent-
for-
let the
it has to be
superintendent
athletics.
deal with
It has to be for athletics though.
Well, for now, but it wouldn't have to be. If you had more time and you weren't stressed in 2 hours to pass a budget for the town, you might do it differently. But I'd say for tonight, the recommendation would be is move the re-put the 31,000 of operating expenses back and task superintendent to find offsetting 31,000 in athletics, so you have a balanced budget, but task him to come back and say, what's the better way to do it? Because you're hiding this money. Like, if rink things go up by 5K
So that we don't
next
spend
year.
like 22 minutes doing this, there's probably 6 or 7 other of these similar type things in this budget. So, like I get that we're not hiding it, but we need to.
This was the only one where it's not a one-time cost.
Right.
Like, we're, whenever possible, I used one-time expenses that aren't, because I'm not a fan of taking things out of the
And the
operating.
easy suggestion is take it out of the 2 equipment lines, so you balance that thing, and then task the superintendent to determine if equipment every year, which is more capital, can be funded by the gate receipts. That way, at least it's even for this, and you put structural into structural.
You lost me on that last part.
So you have 34,000 in equipment line.
Yeah.
You can task the superintendent to say, put the 31,000 back in rental, because that definitely is structural, and offset it with the equipment line, knowing you're gonna fund that with the gate receipts for next year,
Yeah.
and task superintendent to come back to the school committee and go, is the equipment line a better place to put gate receipt money? You don't have to decide that now.
So we're still doing the same thing, we're just taking it from the equipment line instead of the.
Yes, but you're
supplies.
at least putting it in more accurate stuff,
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Would you like me to do
Yeah,
that
that's
prior
fine.
to our meeting?
yeah, I think so. Sherry, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing is
And
the
the equipment
equipment.
could change year to year too.
Yeah,
We
see, I
know
feel like the
rental fees are
uniform and
pretty
supplies is
consistent,
better,
they're gonna
because the
increase,
equipment is
and-
stuff they need to have, right? Like, you can't not have helmets and play football, you can't not
So
have.
is the recommendation for me to, for lack of a better word, zero out the equipment line?
No, zero out the uniform line.
Uniform line,
Uniform.
Yeah.
Uniform,
Okay,
and
so I
put the rink fees back.
put the right back, and then I won't have enough time to update
That's fine.
the
yeah.
recommendation document
Yep,
prior to that,
Yep,
but,
that's fine.
Okay.
But we also mentioned the equipment line, so what are we doing with the equipment line?
leaving it as.
Leaving
We're
it
just
as
leaving the
is.
equipment
Yeah.
line.
yeah,
We'll take out stuff for uniforms. We'll use gate receipts
for the
to
uniforms and
purchase the
supplies.
uniforms that are needed for this upcoming year, and have rental come out of the general operating budget.
Mhm.
Yeah, cause ultimately they don't buy, we might not buy new uniforms every year anyways.
Somebody's probably buying some.
Yeah, but not,
Okay. I can do that. Okay. And then in terms of changes, I did go in and change the art line for Hamilton. I have not had a chance to speak to the principal because it was school vacation week. But just based on, the calculations, I put it back to what it would have been had he and I not had the conversation about what he thought was
Yep.
appropriate. understanding he's new to that school.
Yeah.
This was our first budget season, so I did adjust that just based on the school size and to make it align with, more closely to what it would have been with those initial figures that.
The other thing
you
too,
know,
just to
that together.
consider when this activity is happening, right, we the principals having to meet with their staff. They're also concerned too what current supplies they have,
Yep.
right, so they're only requesting what they know they need. So I know Hamilton came out less than some of the other schools, Hamilton has more students, but again, I'm not saying this is why, but what it could be once we find out, could be that they already have a number of supplies that haven't been used yet, that they can use for next year.
Don't you think the art
Which
teacher would know
offsets?
that though?
What was that?
Don't you think the art teacher would know that?
I think so,
Yeah.
but, I mean, I'm not sure.
Yes,
We
which is
haven't
why I've
heard an
been,
answer
because I know
yet
the
from the
principals went and
school,
had
so-
conversations
Yeah.
with their department heads, and when they came back to me, and a lot of them had spreadsheets with who they had talked
Yeah.
to and all the exact things out, so, when they were coming to me saying, I think this would be appropriate, it was based on those conversations and based on the documents that they had from the different itinerants in those areas, so, that's why I felt comfortable putting in the numbers that they had, because they had had those conversations.
Yep.
That being said, ultimately, the bottom lines within them are probably not gonna change because we did do that exercise, but now that everyone's back from break, I will go and sit with them and say, let's just look at this one more time. This is what your per pupil cost is for art, this is what your per pupil is, because that's how I did it. I didn't just take
Yep.
the whole budget number and then divide it by the number of students.
Yeah.
I did it based on, the average number of what it costs per student for art. I'm gonna go through that exercise again with them and see if their allocations, if they would like to change their allocations or if they're comomfortable where they are. I'm happy to do that. I just couldn't do it for this
Yeah, no,
meeting
no,
because they
that's
were not
fine.
here. But I did personally go through it and I looked to see, and I went back at my notes and looked at the conversations, and, they're really, all of the comments that I had and all the notes I took aligned with what they were saying, but I'll still have that conversation.
Okay, thank you.
I believe those are all of the changes, within this document. I don't know if anyone has any additional questions.
Did you ever get an answer on the health equity rebate number from the trust?
From the trust, so I did, I got information, and last year there was no rebate, there was in fact no offset, or I guess the prior year, and then, I guess right prior to my starting, there was, instead of a rebate, it was actually, we had a $15,000 increase in what would have been, so they actually had an additional payment that was made, so that was not a rebate, so that happened just prior. So I'm assuming that right about now, we should be receiving what's gonna be happening, for this current year. I believe, because obviously it goes calendar year, even though our plan year goes July to July, they run their numbers based on the calendar year, and they do all of their cross-checking and their offsetting to what everything is, so I'm assuming sometime in the next month we'll receive that information. Now, I do know that there was a significant amount of documentation that I sent out, with regard to different questions that we had that came out of the meeting. Is there anything in particular that anyone here would like to discuss outside of the regular budget document?
I had a question on the salaries for the nutrition enterprise fund, because they changed.
Yes, so there was, an additional position that I had listed as inactive. So I did not have it listed in my vacancies, and in conversations going through everything and just making sure we had the substitute lines, the position is actually active, and there's currently a substitute in that line.
Okay.
So I added that back into the vacancy.
Okay,
So it increased, I don't know the total amount, but I increased it to the salary line, not the substitute line, even though there's a sub in that position right now.
okay. And then my other question on that, the salaries with that was, I noticed in the presentation, it talks about, I can't find my notes, in the revised budget that we got, there were 2 sustainability positions, but those were not, like, in what we had been given.
So, right now, from my understanding, and again, I will defer to, Ms. Cawley on this, because the sustainability position, so we have a grant right now that's
Yep.
paying for most to get the phone out. However, it does not cover salaries. So those positions right now, I believe, are accounted for because we have vacant positions that do not need to be filled. And that's why I said I wanna get you a better
Because
answer.
in that file, it specifically shows salary money being allocated to those positions.
Yeah,
out of
because
the
we
grant.
have, gosh, I apologize about one of her name. So we have a sustainability coordinator, I
Yeah.
believe we only have one, who's in that position. So that salary is not like an additional salary, it's being offset by a position that's not, currently filled. So
Okay.
it's, we're using existing fiscal 25 budgeted dollars, paying for that position.
Okay, I thought that position was temporary, is that like?
Yes, and that was what I was gonna say, I do
Okay.
not have it in this because my understanding is that once the grant ended, so did that position.
Okay, so
Um,
it's when the grant ends, which
when
is
the
what,
grant ends.
27 or whatever?
I believe we have to do it every year.
Every year.
We have to re-up it every year, but again, let me get more information on that. So I do not have it as a budgeted item because my understanding is that it was a temporary position.
Cause I think the intent is, once it's at the school and up and running and
Right, right,
everything,
the
like,
people
they don't
will-
really need, more the coordinator person is
Correct,
to
yeah.
help
And-
set it
and-
up and get it all sort of at the school.
And that was my understanding, but I know what you're talking about, because in the document that was provided as to what would it take for sustainability for it to continue after the grant, salaries are in
Yeah,
document.
that's the document that I'm looking for that I
Right.
can't find, yeah, okay.
But so that was, I presented it how it was presented to me, cause I, again, with people being out, wanted to make sure you had the information in a timely manner. But my understanding was that those positions were not continuing, so if the intent is that they will be continuing, it needs to be a discussion item, but they wouldn't, as far as I know, it's not anything that would affect the fiscal 26 budget.
Well, that's why it is in the fiscal 26 budget though, in this sheet that
In
you
her sheet,
provided,
okay.
yes, and
And-
that's why I had the question, yeah,
Okay, and she will be here, I believe, this evening, so
Okay.
we can certainly, and if that's something that we need to consider, I can absolutely add it into the budget, the funds are available for
Okay.
us to do that, and we can certainly adjust the budget.
And would that
accordingly.
change the salary number that's in there now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
Could you explain, facilities 56, 2015, the electricity solar credits?
Ooh. Yes, I'll do my best to.
That's an expense, even though it says credit?
Yes, they are not credits for the school district. They are, okay, I'm gonna do my best not to boggle this.
Oh, is this all town?
Yes, so there is an agreement between the town and the school, where the town receives solar credits. However, those credits appear on the school district's bills. So
So the town gets the credit.
the
Just-
town gets the credit, so our bills are reduced by these credits on a monthly basis. So we pay whatever the difference is on those bills, then we pay the town what the credits were that they received per that bill. So they're called solar credits, but it is an expense for us. So when you are looking at our expense line, it's a combination of two things, and I broke it out on the budget after this initial conversation, cause it's a little convoluted. So that they could see how much is going to solar credits and how much is going to our bill. But the way to think of it is, if we were not getting those solar credits on our bill, we would be paying those bills. So that amount is what our bills would be.
So what's the point if there's no difference?
I mean,
Who's-
the
someone
point is,
must-
we have to pay the town, it is a.
The
it's-
credit's
it's-
going to the town.
The credit goes to the
There-
town,
there's-
so we have to handle it that way because that is the agreement, and I believe it is a
And we're gonna,
25-year agreement.
yeah, and I'm gonna be following up with Ralph, we're just trying to get the budget and everything, all of this, and then there'll be a meeting, Ralph, myself, Deb, and Leslie to look at it and to kinda go back and have, like, I guess, a similar conversation I had years ago about this agreement, and review it and see if there's anything we should bring back to the school committee.
Okay,
Because they were saying they couldn't give the town the credit, they have to give it to us, right? Was that the?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
credit goes,
They
the
can't-
credit
they can't
goes,
do
the
two
different
credit goes
bills?
to us, and then we send it off to the town.
And the individuals who did this agreement, none of them are.
Yeah, and I'd like to know
presently here,
more of
so-
why that happened and why the school department was not part of the agreement at the time, and again, this goes back well before all of us.
And along those lines, while we're talking about energy, I had a conversation with the town finance director about NRG
Okay.
and about that, and she and I are gonna meet because it's something that they do, and from our conversation that the school can benefit if we combine forces with that contract. So she and I are gonna continue that conversation.
Okay. Did you ever find out about our contract?
Our contract, we have one for gas,
Okay.
but the other one apparently is expired. But, it ended. And it ended at the same time, the town had the same thing, so
Okay.
when we had that conversation, we were like, okay, how can we work together
Okay.
to, and she and I obviously had this conversation while we're both in the middle of budget.
Yeah.
But as soon as I thought, she knew exactly what I was talking about, she was very helpful, and, so we're gonna investigate that
Okay,
more.
awesome, thank you.
Since Trish isn't here, I just general comment, if you're gonna have this conversation tonight, is again, structural stuff that's in the nutrition spend down plan. So, I'm a little confused how the cost of food is not going up, although I would think it generally would, but the quality's gonna go up. In the spend down plan, it says they're spending money to improve quality. I don't think that's a one-time thing, I'd hope not. So why isn't the cost going up of food?
We question the cost of food also.
Yeah.
So that's one, and two is there's some other structural stuff in there, like for example, buying the hydroponic kits. Sounds like a good idea, I don't really know what it is, I assume that you grow your own food at the school, is that correct, Kenny?
It would be used to give to the students just to increase their awareness of hydroponics and how it works.
Okay, so, but is there extra costs once you buy the kits? And who's gonna fund that? Again, my point is, be careful buying stuff that you don't fully know what the cost will be.
My understanding those are they're individual kits that the kids get to use and take and bring home.
Yeah, we'll be going through, we just
Okay,
got that
yeah.
information when you did, so we'll be going through it
Okay, so
tonight.
that's a different, yeah, then okay, that's a,
That is something for them to use.
but then again, is that a one-time thing, or will
They
will
do
new
every
kids
year
get,
to-
who didn't get the kits, be expected to get it every year?
Mhm.
So again, but sounds like you'll have that conversation tonight.
And that was unfortunate that I had that information and I didn't even realize that that attachment didn't make it with all of the other ones, so that you had more time to review that.
Yeah, 'cause I literally saw it when I walked in the door today, so.
That's when we saw it too.
The other thing I would recommend is the committee recommend to the full school committee task superintendent to investigate whether CES designation has been a positive or negative for the district. I think it comes due next year or this year.
I'm not sure.
In general, it's not been a,
doing,
on
check
net.
everything.
What was that last part?
I would just task, that the committee
No,
task the
what
super.
did you say?
That on general, it's not been a positive.
Okay.
I mean, yes, if you think, okay, now I don't have to collect the stuff, but, you know, is the number of meals increased? Is what's been the P&L at the school? Like, just when you say food is free, doesn't necessarily mean it's free. So,
And I think it's something,
Oh.
and I agree wholeheartedly, just because as going through this process, so this is the first time I'm obviously doing the nutrition budget and going through, and me noticing like the reduction in our reimbursements and what our meal counts were and our state match and things like that. So that's definitely something that we need to look into. We need to investigate why we're continually decreasing.
right, cause
and-
I believe the decision was made without the approval. So,
Do you wanna make that motion, Bob?
yes, I would make a motion to recommend to the school committee to task the superintendent to report back on the CES designation, and it's, well, let me rephrase, sorry. Make a motion, the committee recommends to the full school committee to task the superintendent to report back on the CES designation for QUID and whether that should continue going forward.
I'll second that.
nays? Okay, passes. I wrote it down, and now we gotta bring it to school
We know
committee.
what to do with it too, right? Okay.
And while I'm here,
We're just finishing up this other meeting.
I've got two other motions that's on the agenda. I don't know if we wanna end at 5:30, I think we do.
We have
So-
to,
Yeah, we have to
So-
go to school committee.
My second motion is that the committee recommends to the school committee to task the superintendent to report back by September 1st on the current status of the turf and track field, the likely estimate of the replacement time, and the likely estimated cost of such replacement, to understand if the current fund balance amount is adequate or not, to ensure that that replacement of the turf and track will be done without having to spend outside the fund balance amount.
I'll second that.
So you said.
Task the superintendent to report back by September 1st on the status of the turf and track complex at NK High School to determine the likely window for replacement, the estimated cost of replacement, and whether the current fund balance amount and projected additions are sufficient to meet that. My personal feeling is you are underfunding it, but I think we should let the superintendent investigate and report back to the school committee if that's the case.
Has there been complaints about the track itself and the turf?
No, but it's coming up on 8 years. It's,
coming up with.
when it was
needs
built,
replacement.
the estimated life was 10 to 12 years. The estimated replacement then was 1.5 million. I'm guessing that's low, but that's why we tasked the superintendent, and there's only 700,000 as far as I could tell in the fund balance for that.
I think there's 800 and 700,000 from our capital reserve and 100,000
Yeah.
from the town.
Okay.
But we have not been keeping up with the funding because we haven't had extra. Yeah.
And
Right.
one of the documents that we shared was excuse me, let me start that again. One of the recommendations I made was what, based on prior recommendations from prior school committees, what funding amount was to go into certain areas, should there be a surplus? And my recommendation was for us to put that designated amount in them, and one of them was for the athletic complex.
Right, so my thought would be is 1 September, Kenny, if you think that's enough time, but you'll be having
I think
a
it
rough
should be
idea of your
September.
FY25 surplus and whether that amount's on track.
I just wanna make sure I have three items regarding that. One is the timeline of when to replace it. Two, what's the estimated cost at this point to replace it? And what do we have in the fund balance versus what is needed to do the replacement of the track and the turf?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, motion's carried.
My last motion is that the school committee task the superintendent and the budget and finance advisory subcommittee to find $750,000 in either operating expenses or revenue enhancements by 1 October in order to cover the fund balance reappropriation that is being done for the upcoming budget cycle. My rationale is every time you keep reappropriating fund balance and spending it in the general fund, you're just kicking the can down the road. And two is, I could be wrong, but and I think, Kenny, this is something maybe you could talk to Ralph about, because the town should know whether our aggregate reval percentage is higher or lower than revals from other towns, is that this is a ticking time bomb with state aid. Because I'm guessing other places aren't seeing 20 and 25% revals. And that's on the low end, I'm guessing. I don't know, maybe the rest of you who've got your revals.
I wanna say mine's much higher than that.
But, as you know, that goes into the state aid calculation. And, you know, what GIS says your wealth and ability to pay is vastly different than the town's actual ability to pay. The state aid doesn't take that into account. And so my feeling is the school committee should at least have a set of recommendations before going into the budget cycle, potential areas, so you're not reappropriating fund balance to cover operating expenses. That to me is, I think, one of the purposes of this subcommittee.
Do you have a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Any discussion?
I agree with you, I'm not sure, like, dictating a number is, like, to drive towards a specific number, but I think having the school committee discuss it is certainly,
Well, you need something to target.
yeah.
You've been reappropriating 500,000, and I get why you're doing it, but you're gonna have the same IT need next year,
Mm-hmm.
and
No,
you supplanted other stuff in prior budgets, so at some point, you have to find a number. A number's a goal.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean you have to meet it fully, you may exceed it.
No, I think it's worth having the conversation.
So let's make sure I have the motion correct. It's to task the superintendent, budget and finance advisory to find $750K in either the operating budget or revenue to cover the fund balance reappropriation in the upcoming FY '26 balance. And this is to be done by October 1st.
Yes.
Call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Passes.
5:27. I know it's 5:27.
Okay. Okay. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 24th. And we'll call adjournment of the meeting.
Aye.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.